So in today's video, we are here to give our post-draft power rankings. Now, before we get into the video, please consider liking and subscribing, and let's jump right into the video. So these are obviously just my rankings, my opinions based off of what these teams have done in the offseason. If I have a team ranked too high, it's just my opinion. It's just my list. There hasn't been a single game played, and the only thing I can base these power rankings off of is what they've done in the offseason and what they did in their draft. So if you disagree with where I rank a team, I completely understand. There hasn't been a single game played. So technically, if you ask me, you could argue that about 6 teams could be the number 1 team in the NFL right now. But with all that being said, let's get right into the rankings. So at number 10, it was kind of a toss-up between a couple of teams. Originally, I had the Raiders there, but I kept fighting myself back and forth with the Raiders and the team that I actually have at number 10, and that is the 49ers. The 49ers, I still think, are a great team. Now, obviously, what's going on with Debo, and we don't know what's going on with Jimmy Garoppolo, that still has to get figured out. And so that could change the way where I would rank the 49ers, because if Debo's gone, I think it would dramatically change the 49ers. But because he's still on the team right now, and because I kind of believe that this situation might get figured out, I think the 49ers will be fine. Even if Trey Lance does end up starting next season, I still think the 49ers are going to be just fine on offense, because Kyle Shanahan's so great at being a head coach, just getting guys open, scheming them open, that you can place any running back into that offense and they will be just fine. And the way that they use Deebo Samuel, I don't think he wants to be used that way, but he's so good at just scheming guys open that it really doesn't matter, in my opinion, who the quarterback is, as long as they're just good enough to get the ball to the players. In the Kyle Shanahan offense, the quarterback's not asked to do much. So I think Trey Lance, even if he is starting the 49ers, will be fine. This pick's mainly because of their defense. They have an elite defensive line of guys that they can constantly rotate with, and they just have an overall great defense. They added Charvarius Ward to their secondary. They drafted Drake Jackson to help even more on that defensive line. And so I think the 49ers, even though they didn't really have a pick until the second round, they added Charvarius Ward, who's a great player. He was great with the Chiefs last year. And then just adding Drake Jackson, more depth to that defensive line that's constantly rotating to go along with Nick Bosa. I think the 49ers, they're going to be a great team next year, and I think they're going to be one of the top teams competing next year. They just got to stay healthy. Coming in at number 9, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Now, this might be surprising because in reality, the Chargers haven't done anything the last few years, especially, the way their season ended. They basically ended their season by calling a timeout, but we won't get into that. But I think the Chargers, they've had a great offseason. Really, they've added almost everything to improve their team, especially their defense. They traded for Khalil Mack. They added J.C. Jackson to their secondary. They added Sebastian Joseph Day to help with that run defense that was atrocious last year. They re-signed Mike Williams on the offense. They added offensive lineman Zion Johnson in the draft to go along with Rashawn Slater, who they drafted last year. So they're giving Justin Herbert as much help as they can possibly give him. They want to make sure Justin Herbert does not get hit. They're loading up on defense, trying to improve that defense, and they're really trying to make a huge impact in the AFC West. And I think the Chargers, based off their offseason moves, what they did, adding guys like J.C. Jackson, Khalil Mack, Sebastian Day, going to help in the run defense, and just helping the offensive line protect Justin Herbert. I really like what the Chargers have done, and I have them at number 9. Coming in at number 8, we have the Baltimore Ravens. Now, obviously, their season was not great last year, but that's all chopped up due to injuries. The Ravens, this pick is basically because we know the Ravens are a great team, but injuries kind of caught up to them. They were 8-3 last year, and that was with missing some guys like Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins. Lamar Jackson was hurt at times last season. They lost Marcus Peters at times. They lost Marlon Humphrey. And so they were just injured to hell and back. And yeah, they had the worst pass defense in the NFL last year, but that's also contributed to the injuries that they had last year. They lost star players last year, and so I don't think the injury bug, there's no way it's going to hit a team that bad 2 years in a row. So from that perspective, that's why the Ravens are so high, but they also hit great on the draft. They added Kyle Hamilton to that defense. They added David Ojabo from Michigan. He's a great player who's hurt, but I think he'll make an impact once he is healthy. They added Travis Jones on the inside, so they're just going to be mauling guys in the run game. They're going to be impossible to throw on. They did lose Hollywood Brown on the offense. Losing Marquise Brown is going to kind of hurt them because it really doesn't feel like they have anybody to throw to. And guys like Bateman and Duvernay, they're really going to have to step up. But we know what Mark Andrews can do in the pass game. So I think offensively, they're going to be okay. They're just going to ground and pound the football. And you could tell by the draft because they drafted Tyler Linderbaum, the center, who's just going to maul people on the offensive line. They're going to just make holes for whoever's running the football to just run the ball down defense's throat week in and week out. So I think the Ravens, personally, based off of all the moves that they have made, they're the number ranked 8 team, and they're not going to be injured like like they were last year. Coming in at number 7, we have the Green Bay Packers. Now, some people may think I have them ranked too high, but at the end of the day, when you have Aaron Rodgers, the Green Bay Packers are going to be just fine. Now, if I'm being 100% honest, if this was before the draft, I don't know if I would have had the Packers in the top 10 just based off of losing Davante Adams. That's a huge loss. But at the same time, I may have been overreacting back then. I didn't have them in the top 10 during my free agency power rankings. But after the draft and after I've kind of settled down on the Packers, I think the Packers actually had a really good offseason and a really good draft. Now, obviously, losing Davante Adams is massive, and that's going to be hard to replace. But in free agency, they did make a couple of moves. They signed Sammy Watkins, who, if he can stay healthy, he's going to make a huge impact in big spots. He did that a lot in Kansas City. They added Jaron Reed. He's going to help with that run defense, and it's just adding another piece to a defense that was already great last year. And then in the draft, personally, I like what the Packers did in the draft. They added 2 defensive studs from Georgia and Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, and then they drafted a receiver at 34 in Christian Watson. Now, what's stupid about the Packers is if they would have taken Christian Watson in the first round, people wouldn't have been, complaining that the Packers didn't draft a receiver. So the whole narrative thing, in my opinion, is kind of garbage because they still got a receiver. And so I don't know why people are upset. It didn't happen in the first round, and Christian Watson was probably the guy they were going to go with. They loaded up on defense. That defense is going to be absolutely insane. And then you also have to think that the Packers, they were 7-0 in Matt LaFleur's time with the Packers without Davante Adams. So we know the Packers can win without him. I know it's circumstantial and it's only a few games, but we got to sample size what they can do without Davante Adams. But it's also a great time for guys like Amari Rodgers to step up in his second year. Let's see what he can do in his second year in this offense. And overall, I think the Packers are in a solid spot. The NFC isn't necessarily the strongest conference. I think it got a little bit better throughout the draft, but they want to get that bad taste out of their mouth after losing to the 49ers in the playoffs last year. But overall, I think the Packers, fairly solid offseason. I think they're going to be a good team next year. I think they're going to be a great team. I think they're going to win the division, and I have the Packers at number 7. At number 6, we have the Denver Broncos. This one's pretty simple why they're there. They added Russell Wilson, a team that was literally a quarterback away last year, who had a Super Bowl caliber defense. They had the offensive line. They had the offensive weapons. They literally just did not have a quarterback. Sorry, Teddy Bridgewater. Sorry, Drew Lock. You guys were not the answer for the Broncos. But now they add Russell Wilson to the 24th ranked scoring offense in the NFL last year. Guys like Tim Patrick, Jerry Jeudy, Courtland Sutton will now have time to shine. They finally have a quarterback that will throw to them. They had a great draft. They added Greg Dulcich after trading away Noah Fant. And then they also added run stuffers like DJ Jones. And they also added Randy Gregory in the offseason. And in the draft, they added Nick Bonito. And so they added even more pieces to their defense that's already great. And they also brought in Nathaniel Hackett as their new head coach. So the Broncos, based off their offseason moves, the quarterback they added, their defense that they had last year, I have the Broncos at number 6. Coming in at number 5, we have the Cincinnati Bengals. Now the Bengals, they are coming off of a loss in the Super Bowl, but the fact that they made it that far was kind of impressive. Burrow was sacked 19 times in the playoffs, coming off of an ACL injury, and they had a garbage offensive line, and they've completely revamped their offensive line from last year. They added La'el Collins, Alex Kappa, and Ted Karras to that offensive line, and they also added a couple guys on offense like Hayden Hurst after losing CJ Uzomah. The defense also kept a lot of its talent. They franchise tagged Jesse Bates. They brought back Eli Apple, and they drafted Daxton Hill, who is a great player out of Michigan, and they still have guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, and then they were able to keep their D-line intact with guys like Sam Hubbard, DJ Reader, BJ Hill, and Trey Hendrickson. So the Ravens overall, they had probably one of the better overall off seasons in the entire NFL. I really like what they did in the off season. Help Joe Burrow, make sure he's not going to get hit every single play. And then defensively, they added guys like Daxton Hill to that defense, and they brought back guys because the defense was plenty good enough last year. They were really the guys who shined in the playoffs for the Bengals last year. So overall, I like what the Bengals did, and I have the Bengals at number 5. Coming in at number 4, we have the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, obviously, they lost Tyreek Hill. That's the whole big elephant in the room. The Chiefs lost Tyreek Hill. That's nothing to brush over. But overall, I think the Chiefs offensively, and this is probably really biased, I think they had a great offseason because after losing Tyreek Hill, we wanted Brett Veach to go huge, make massive moves. He didn't. He stuck to his guns, and overall, I think what Brett Veach did this offseason may have been his best work yet. He added guys like Juju, MVS to that offense. He added Ronald Jones, and you also have McCole Hardman, who's still there, who's going to have a chance to shine in the offense. They still have Travis Kelce there, and in the draft they added Sky Moore. But if we're looking at what Brett Veach really did, the Chiefs went hard on defense, and I don't think I've seen the Chiefs go this hard on defense in my entire life. They made massive moves at defense. Obviously they lost Honey Badger, but they went kind of younger. They brought in Justin Reed, and in the draft they drafted a whole bunch of good defensive players. They brought in Trent McDuffie in the draft. They drafted George Karlaftis, and they just went massive depth on the defensive side of the ball in this year's draft. And you have to keep in mind, they still have Patrick Mahomes, they still have Andy Reid, like I mentioned, they still have Travis Kelce there, Hardman, who's been in that offense for, going on his 4th year now. So overall, I think they did a great job addressing all the needs that they had on this team in the offseason and in the draft. And I think the Chiefs are right back up there to being a team that's probably going to win their division for a 7th time in a row. Coming in at number 3, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Well, they got Tom Brady back, so if you have Tom Brady as your quarterback, you're instantly a top 10 team in the NFL. But among things that they did with getting Tom Brady back, they were able to get a deal done with Chris Godwin. They brought back Leonard Fournette. They signed Russell Gage. They brought back Charlton Davis. They re-signed Ryan Jensen, and now they just have a loaded wide receiver room. They drafted Logan Hall to that great defense that they already have. If we're going back to the offensive side of the ball, Ali Marpet retired, but they were able to acquire Shaq Mason after a trade with the Patriots. They lost Jordan Whitehead, but they were able to add Logan Ryan. So basically the Buccaneers are still a great team. They really didn't take a step backwards. They got Tom Brady back. They added more offensive weapons. They lost some guys on defense, but they filled those holes on defense. They gave Todd Bowles a great team to succeed in his first year as head coach of the Buccaneers after Bruce Arians retired. So overall, I think what the Buccaneers did was great, and I think they're right back in the conversation as Super Bowl favorites. I mean, they were like that when Tom Brady come back, but overall, they're going to be a great team next year. They're a team that's going to win a whole bunch of games next year. But again, they're a team, they had a disappointing end of their season last year. But overall, I mean, I think the Buccaneers are probably one of the top 3 teams in the NFL, as you can see, based off of my rankings. Coming in at number 2, we have the Los Angeles Rams. Now, it's weird probably to have the Super Bowl champions at number 2, but yeah, it's just my list. It's just my opinion. But obviously, Super Bowl champions, they've had a pretty quiet offseason, and that's not a diss towards them. It's just, I mean, you just won the Super Bowl. You don't need to go massive on it, but, they did have more of a quiet offseason. They didn't have many draft picks. They didn't draft until the 3rd round. But in free agency, they were able to bring in Allen Robinson to go along with the best wide receiver in football right now, Cooper Kupp, along with Van Jefferson. So they're going to have a great trio of weapons to throw to. And obviously they brought in Bobby Wagner. They lost Von Miller in free agency, but they brought in Bobby Wagner. I don't think that's really going to hurt them that much, because I think Bobby Wagner is going to bring a great fire, great play to that defense that was already great last year, because you have guys like Aaron Donald, Leonard Floyd, Jordan Fuller, Jalen Ramsey. Matthew Stafford got a contract extension, and then you have Sean McVay, who's a top 5-10 coach in the NFL. So this team's not going anywhere, I don't think. This team is just as great as they were last year. They didn't really need to go big on the offseason because most of the guys that they wanted were already on the team. They were already going to be there. So the Rams, everything they've done, I'm a fan of. I still think they're going to be a great team, and I still think they're the team to beat in the NFC, and I have the Rams at number 2. So coming in at number 1 is the Buffalo Bills. Now, I'm probably overreacting to this, but again, as I said in the beginning of the video, we haven't seen a single game played, and this is basically based off of what I see on paper and just kind of my personal opinion off these teams and how their season ended last year. Now, their season did end in disappointing fashion when they lost to the Chiefs in the divisional round. But at the same time, if we're looking at this team, Josh Allen played the 2 most perfect games I think I've ever seen of football in my life, throwing 9 touchdowns in 2 games, beating the Patriots, and then they lost to the Chiefs in the divisional round. But that kind of chopped up to their defense in the final 13 seconds. But overall, I mean, offensively, they're going to be just fine. They signed Stephon Diggs to an extension. Gabriel Davis shined against the Chiefs, so now that's another weapon that we know Josh Allen's going to be able to throw to. He had 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs. They drafted James Cook, Dalvin Cook's brother, out of Georgia, so they drafted a running back. That's going to take the burden off of Josh Allen for having to run every single play. That's going to take some hits off of his body. Like, look at that Buccaneers game last year. He was running the ball like crazy. And then defensively, they needed to add a little bit of secondary help, especially after that divisional round, because their defense literally could not stop a single soul in that divisional round. They drafted Kyer Elam to go along with Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White. So their secondary is going to be really good last year. So their secondary is going to be really good next year. And then they obviously added Von Miller this offseason to go along with Tremaine Edmonds. So I think the Buffalo Bills, I mean, just from my personal opinion, based off everything they did, based off how their season ended, if they didn't give up those plays in those final 13 seconds, they probably would have went to the Super Bowl last year. Like, Josh Allen was on fire. And I think just how the season ended, the last 2 seasons that Josh Allen had, he's poised to probably win the MVP this year. That's where my money would go personally. If I gamble on the MVP, I'd probably go Josh Allen for that next year. But overall, I like the Buffalo Bills and just how great they were in those playoffs last year. They just ran into a roadblock that was Patrick Mahomes. I think the Buffalo Bills are the #1 team in the NFL right now. But those are my post-draft power rankings. Again, it's just my list. At the same time, none of this really matters because we haven't seen a single game played. And by the time that the season starts, some of these teams may not even be in the top 10 because of circumstances that we don't know now. But those are my top 10 teams in the NFL post-draft. Give me your power rankings down below, and I'll see you in the next one.